already, but they're back online, and he is back on. And so what he had agreed to speak to was the work that other municipalities have done across the country as it relates to race relations, as it pertains to Aboriginal people in the country. My name is Joyce Hunter, for those of you who don't know me. I'm the strategy coordinator for the Aboriginal Liaison Unit for the City of Thunder Bay, and I want to thank you all for coming.
All right. Are we ready? Okay. Thank you. Hello, everybody. I'm Justice Murray Sinclair, as you have been so patiently waiting to hear, I imagine. I want to begin by apologizing twice, in fact, for, first of all, not being there with you. I realized that there was an expectation I would be in attendance, but the commissioners have been called to a meeting here in Alberta, and as a result, I had to fly here on very short notice. And with a great deal of reluctance, I had to cancel my trip to your community in order to be with you. So I apologize for that. And I also apologize for the technical difficulties that have plagued us being able to get me on the appropriate time. But I hope we're now connected. And I'll tell you that I hope you can hear and see me, because I can't hear or see you. And as a result of that, I feel like I'm talking to a blank screen. But as I was saying earlier on, this is not the first time that I felt like I was talking and nobody was listening to me. One of the things I was asked to do this evening would be to talk to you about the work of the Commission, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, in working with communities, and to discuss the issue of the importance of reconciliation at the community level and what that might look like based upon some of the things that we've observed, as well as some of the things that we've discovered over the course of our work as commissioners. As you know, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was created by the Indian Residential Schools Settlement Agreement, and that settlement agreement brought an end to lawsuits by about 60,000 individuals who had sued the government of Canada and the various churches that were involved in the management of residential schools across the country. Those claims were made for loss of language, loss of culture, interference with family relationships, improper removal of children from families, as well as for the injuries that individuals sustained while they were in the schools. But the compensation process that has taken place has resulted in 80,000 people filing those claims, and about half of them have made claims for the injuries that they sustained as a result of physical abuse, much of it having to do with allegations of sexual abuse. That experience of Aboriginal people in the residential schools of this country has led to a great deal of poor relationship and a poor view of Canadian society, Canadian government, and the churches to a certain extent in many Aboriginal communities. And our responsibility as a commission was, first of all, to investigate the stories and document the history of those who attended residential schools and the schools themselves, and to educate the public about residential schools in order that we could lay a foundation for a discussion about the very important question that comes from that, and that is, what do we now have in society that's going on that is attributable to the residential school experience, and what can we do about it? We have discovered, of course, that not every Aboriginal child in this country has gone to a residential school, and therefore residential schools cannot be held accountable for all of the things that we are seeing in society. So what is it that we must talk about as a commission if we can point to a large number of students being in the schools, but a significant number also not having attended them. So we looked at that question a little bit further, and we discovered that those children who were taken away from their families and placed in residential schools were treated very badly. It's not just about the abuse. If you even put aside the abuse that they experienced at the hands of those who ran the schools and looked only at the question of what happened to those who were in the schools, you'll find that from the very beginning of their involvement with the residential school system, children were demeaned. They were told that they were inferior. They were told their cultures were inferior. Were told that their people were inferior. Their parents and their families were demeaned, and they were treated emotionally very poorly. And as a result of that, after 7 generations of those schools being in operation, a number of people who went through those schools came to believe in what the schools were teaching. But in addition to what went on in the residential schools, the very same message was going on in the public school system as well. And so what we have discovered as a commission is that even those children who didn't go to residential schools, but who were educated in the public schools of this country, experienced demeaning behavior and were treated as inferior students and inferior citizens of this country as well. The history books of this country were replete with stories of heroic European settlers and as poor savage Indians who were trying to do them harm. And the real history of Aboriginal people in this country has never been taught. The fact that it wasn't taught to the Aboriginal children in the public schools has given them also a sense of their own inferiority or their lack of relevance. And at the same time, it has given to non-Aboriginal children in the public schools a misunderstanding of their historical role and the role of their ancestors in the evolution of this country as well. And what I mean by that is that it has created a mythology of superiority on the part of European civilizations. I'm not going to get into a lot of detail about that. That's something that we will talk more fully about in our report. But what we have seen and experienced as commissioners in the visits that we've made to over 500 and some communities is that Aboriginal people generally and non-Aboriginal people generally have had different experiences in the educational systems of this country, to the extent that the relationship between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people is in great jeopardy. The children who were educated in both the public school and the residential school systems have a need to be able to establish a sense of their own identity that has not been answered by the school system. All societies endeavor to ensure that their children understand who they are, where they come from, where they're going, why they're here, what their purpose in life is, and who they are, who their people are, who their society is, and what it is that they have as a responsibility to that society. Those questions were not answered in a way that was appropriate for the Aboriginal children in the schools, and they need to be answered in a way that gives them some meaning. And if you wonder why I say that, all you need to do is look at the continued high dropout rate of Aboriginal children in the public schools of this country. And we need to do something about that. But what it also has done is it has contributed to a perspective of Aboriginal people on both sides of the room that has resulted in people believing what others have told them about who Aboriginal people are and who non-Aboriginal people are. And that's really what we need to fix. Reconciliation is about changing that relationship. It's about improving that relationship to the extent that we can. And it begins, we believe, at the educational level. We need to change the way that we educate our children about each other. And so we're working very hard as a commission with the educational ministries across the country to ask them to ensure that the curriculum materials in the schools of this country are changed in order to address that in a more appropriate way. And that will take a long time in order to resolve. But reconciliation occurs at many different levels. It occurs at the personal level, so those who went to the schools have to go through their own reconciliation and healing process. They have to reconcile not only with themselves in terms of what happened to them and come to terms with that, they also have to reconcile with those who injured them. They need to reconcile with the people who may have hurt them or they may have hurt in the course of their lifetime. And that includes their children and members of their family. Reconciliation within the family is a significant issue, and within the Aboriginal families who have been impacted by residential schools, we believe is a significant issue. But reconciliation within the community is also quite significant. And within Aboriginal communities, we know that at the latter part of the experience of residential schools, student-on-student abuse was a significant problem. And therefore, within Aboriginal communities, perpetrator and victim sometimes are living side by side. Or sometimes perpetrators come from an adjacent community or from a different community. And those communities need to go through a reconciliation process as well. And those issues will be things that we'll talk about in our report. And of course, we also have to talk about reconciliation between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal communities. And that's where this kind of session that you're having today is very important. What is it that your community can do to improve the relationship between the non-Aboriginal people who are living near you and the Aboriginal people who are living near you? And that's an important question because it's people who are living side by side who will have the greatest impact upon the enhancement of relationships in this country. And I've been asked if I could just mention a few of the examples of things that we have seen at the urban level, at the city level, at the town level. And let me give you a few examples of things that we see that we think are a very positive experience. We've just had a recent national event in Vancouver, British Columbia, and that national event has resulted in a great deal of work continuing to be done in Vancouver after the BC event because of the people who were motivated by their experience there. But even before the BC national event, the city of Vancouver had issued a proclamation declaring that within the confines or within the jurisdiction of the city of Vancouver, there was going to be a year of reconciliation in which the city endeavored to address its policies, its approaches, the way that it did its business in order to improve the relationship it was having with local Aboriginal people and with the Indigenous community generally. And that proclamation led to another proclamation being issued by the City of Toronto. And that proclamation was similar in its wording. The intention being that those jurisdictions were declaring to all of its citizens that it was time for the citizenry and for the city itself to begin to look at improving its relationship with Aboriginal people within the cities that they were covered. But words themselves are not sufficient. It really requires action. And a commitment to action must be guided by the words that are in those proclamations. One of the cities that is doing something that we think is a very concrete step is the city of Halifax. In the city of Halifax, every first week of October, the city leaders and the local Mi'kmaq leaders get together and hold a parade in order to honor and recognize the treaty of 1761 that was signed between the European settlers and the Mi'kmaq people that recognized the sovereignty and established a peaceful relationship between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people. And their recognition of that treaty and the importance of it is one that they repeat every year, and the leaders talk about the importance of it, and they show leadership to the citizens of Halifax and to the Mi'kmaq children as well. Children in the schools are included, and they have a parade. And at the end of the parade, they have a feast. And in the feast, they share food with each other, and they celebrate and talk about the importance of their relationship. In the city of Williams Lake in British Columbia, the city of Williams Lake has built a monument within the city as recognition of the fact that there were children who went to a residential school near that city that were damaged and hurt by that, and that some of those children have now family members who are living within their city, and it was a recognition of that. Commemoration monument has also been erected in Prince George, British Columbia, and in other jurisdictions as well. So cities can do important things, towns can do important things to improve relationships, and it's about showing leadership. And we think that at the Commission, that asking the leadership of municipal councils throughout this country, including your city, to show leadership by making declarations, by ensuring that on a day-to-day basis relationships are improved and relationships continue. That's a significant thing to do. In Williams Lake, for example, one of the things that they do is that the leadership of the local band council and tribal council and the leadership of the local municipal councilors have a regular meeting, and they share food and they talk about matters of joint concern and what they can do about it. And they work cooperatively to try to improve those situations. And hopefully that's the kind of thing that can give you some guidance as well as to those issues that you might be able to consider in terms of what it is that you can do in the future. But the one thing that we do know is it's about how we talk to and about each other that's going to have the greatest impact on the future of this country. And we must never forget that our children are watching us, and our children are going to learn from us. And we need to ensure that we show them leadership and we give them the opportunity to learn from us by not just our words, but also by our actions. Well, thank you very much for allowing me to be part of this event. And again, I apologize to you that I can't be there, but I wish you a very successful event, and I hope that my words have been able to assist you in some of your thinking. Thank you.